Okay, so you see all these amazing things happening in track and field, right? People breaking records, pushing limits. It's incredible. But, I was looking at some stuff recently, and it really got me thinking about some of the underlying dynamics.
Oh, yeah.
What's really going on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
So, for example, think about this. In 2019, only 10 women in the entire world ran the 400 meters in under 50 seconds.
Wow.
Which is, the absolute peak of female sprinting.
Yeah.
But the number of men who did the same thing, it was over 21,000.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, and it gets even more kind of mind-blowing when you see, in some cases, boys as young as 17 are actually outperforming the all-time female world record holders across a bunch of different track and field events.
Right.
So it really makes you kind of rethink how you understand athletic achievement, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely challenges some assumptions, and I think it opens up a lot of really interesting questions.
For sure. And that's exactly the puzzle that we're going to try to unpack today in this deep dive into the gender performance gap in track and field.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Watch 'em all drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
We're diving into some pretty fascinating stuff today. The world of track and field, when you really think about it, it's a showcase for like the extremes of human athleticism, right? The speed, the strength, the endurance. It's just mind-blowing sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. Pushing the boundaries of what the human body can achieve.
Exactly. But here's the thing. When you start digging into the performance data, especially when you compare male and female athletes, you start seeing some, pretty significant patterns emerge.
It's the sheer scale of the difference, the consistency of it across so many different events that I find so striking. It's not just a little edge, it's a whole other level.
I totally agree. I mean, just look at the 400 meters in 2019. Right? You had only 10 women who broke that 50-second mark. 10.
And on the men's side.
A whopping 21,242 men ran under 50 seconds that same year. I mean, talk about a difference in orders of magnitude. It just makes you wonder, is this pointing to some fundamental difference in the potential for performance between men and women?
It's a question that has to be asked, right? And the other information you've brought in really adds fuel to that fire, so to speak.
Right. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Across various track and field events, sprints, jumps, even some of the longer distance races, there's at least one boy, 17 years old or younger, who has actually beaten the all-time world record for women in that event.
Now, that's a head-scratcher, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about teenagers outperforming the absolute best women have ever achieved.
Yeah, it definitely makes you pause and think. I mean, does this mean we need to, rethink the perceived limits of female athletic potential? Or is it more about, the way men and women develop physically at different rates and hit their peak performance at different ages?
That's a really crucial question. And I think to really grasp the weight of these findings, we should take a quick trip back in time and look at the historical evolution of track and field as a sport.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Where did track and field even begin?
Well, it all goes back to ancient Greece, to those very first Olympic Games. And, many of the core events we see today, they were there back then too. But the focus was primarily on showcasing male physical prowess.
So men have been kind of the stars of the show from the very beginning.
Pretty much. They've dominated both in terms of participation and in setting those initial performance standards.
Gotcha. So then where do women fit into all of this?
Well, the thing to remember is that women's inclusion in the modern Olympics, particularly in track and field events, happened much, much later.
Really? How much later are we talking?
It wasn't until 1928, think about that women were even allowed to compete in track and field events at the Games. And even then, it was a slow process. Some events, like the pole vault, didn't have a women's category until, get this, the year 2000.
Wow, the year 2000. That's crazy. It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? We're talking about a very different landscape for female athletes, especially in the early days.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about a later start either. You had all sorts of societal barriers, limiting women's access to training, coaching, facilities, and all of that, it's had a lasting impact.
It makes sense. You can't just erase decades of limited opportunity and expect everything to be equal overnight.
Exactly. And while women have made incredible strides in the sport, this historical context helps explain some of those disparities we still see in the data today.
So we've got this historical backdrop. Now let's dig into the actual numbers. You mentioned patterns in performance. Can we start with those 2019 400-meter results? What really jumped out there?
Well, there's a scatter plot in the material you shared that lays it all out. It's called 2019 Top 3 Women Performances versus Men and Boys Results in 2019 400 meters, if you want to look it up. The horizontal axis shows the finishing times, starting at a blazing 43 seconds and going up to 50 seconds. And honestly, the first thing you notice is just how many guys are clustered towards that faster end of the spectrum. It's dense.
And you actually broke down those numbers for us, which were pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, so like I said, over 21,000 men ran under 50 seconds. And then within that group, you had over 15,000 who ran under 49, then over 10,000 who even broke the 48-second barrier. But here's the one that really gets me. 3,865 men ran faster than Salwe Eidnaser's winning time, which was 48.14 seconds.
Hold on, nearly 4,000 men faster than the world champion. That puts it into a whole new light.
Doesn't it? And then you look at the women's side, same year, just 10 women under 50 seconds. The difference is massive,
Yeah, it really highlights the depth of the competition on the men's side. And I remember the scatter plot also included the performances of younger male athletes, right?
Exactly. They used different markers, green for the under 20 boys, orange for the under 18s. And there's a big chunk of them, especially in that 46 to 50-second range, who are actually outperforming Naser's winning time.
So we're talking about teenage boys running faster than the world's top female athlete in that event.
Yeah, in many cases, yeah. And the top 3 women, Naser, Miller-Uibo, and Jackson, their times are marked in purple on that plot. They're incredible athletes, no doubt. But their times, they fall within a range that thousands of men, and a bunch of those younger guys too, were hitting. It just shows you the level we're talking about.
It's not just about the top performers. It's about the whole distribution of talent. Now, you also had data comparing not just one year, but boys' performances to the all-time female world records across different events, right? What did we learn there?
That data is really eye-opening. It shows how many boys, 17 or younger, have actually beaten the current women's world records in different track and field events. So starting with the 100 meters, the classic sprint, we're talking about roughly 400 boys who've run faster than the women's world record.
400, that's a lot of teenagers faster than the fastest woman ever.
It is. And the pattern holds in the other sprints. In the 200 meters, it goes up to around 600 boys. For the 400 meters, remember, that's one we were just talking about. It's estimated at about 650 boys already faster than the women's world record.
Okay, so this isn't just about a single year anymore. This is about exceeding the best any woman has ever done in history.
Exactly. And it keeps going into the middle and longer distances too, although the numbers are a bit lower there.
Yeah.
So you've got around 500 for the 800 meters, about 300 for the 1,500 meters. Then it drops to around 200 for the 3,000 meters, 150 for the 5,000 meters on the track. And for the 10,000 meters, it's around 100 on the track and 50 on the road.
So even in the endurance events, there's still a pretty sizable chunk of young guys outperforming the best women have achieved.
That's right. And it's not just limited to running either. When you look at the jumping events, similar story. For the high jump, we're talking about 200 boys higher than the women's world record. The long jump has about 150, and the triple jump about 100.
So running, jumping, across the board, this pattern's pretty consistent?
Yep. But here's the real kicker. The event with the most dramatic difference, by far, is the pole vault. Get this. 1,500 boys, 17 or younger, have cleared heights greater than the current women's world record.
Whoa, 1,500.
That's unbelievable. It really highlights how stark the difference is in some events.
No kidding. So summing it all up, what we see is a consistent pattern of male athletes outperforming female athletes across pretty much all track and field events. The biggest differences tend to be in those speed and power-based events, like the 400 meters and especially the pole vault. But here's the key. In every single event we looked at, there's at least one boy, 17 or younger, who's done better than the all-time best female athlete.
Okay, so that's a pretty clear picture now. The big question, of course, is why? What's behind this gap in performance?
Well, as you might imagine, it's not a simple answer. It's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
Biological, social, historical, it's layered. Let's start with the biological side.
Okay.
What are some of those key physiological differences? Well, one of the biggest players is testosterone. Men naturally have a lot more of it, especially after they hit puberty. And testosterone, it's a key ingredient for building muscle, for developing explosive power. So that right there gives them an advantage in events like sprinting and jumping. I mean, it's probably a big reason why you've got 1,500 boys outperforming the women's pole vault record. You need serious upper body strength for that.
Right. More muscle usually means more power you can generate. Makes sense. But what about those events that also require stamina, like the 400 meters?
Even in events that combine speed and endurance, those biological differences are still in play. Men typically have bigger hearts and lungs, proportionally speaking, compared to women. And that means they can deliver oxygen to their muscles more efficiently. That's their aerobic capacity, and it's a big deal even in a race like the 400 meters, which is kind of that sweet spot between sprinting and longer distances.
So biology lays the groundwork, so to speak. But how do those social and historical factors we talked about earlier fit into all of this? Do they make the gap bigger or smaller?
They can definitely amplify those biological differences. Think about it. Historically, way more guys have participated in track and field. That means you've got a bigger pool of potential talent to draw from, which increases the likelihood of finding those truly exceptional athletes. That's reflected in the massive difference in the number of men versus women running under 50 seconds in the 400 meters.
More people participating, more chances of finding those outliers.
Exactly. And historically, women have faced more obstacles, less access to top-notch coaching, facilities, competitive opportunities. And while things are getting better, those decades of inequality, they've had an undeniable impact on the development of female athletic talent.
It's not just about raw talent, it's about the support system too.
For sure. And remember, we talked about women joining the Olympic program much later. That's a factor too. Starting later meant slower development of training methods, coaching expertise, the whole infrastructure for supporting elite female athletes. And that lag, it's had a long-term effect.
Yeah, building that kind of foundation, it takes time and consistency. Now, you flagged some of these statistics as especially mind-blowing. Can we revisit those specific examples? What really stood out to you?
Well, that 400-meter madness stat is just wild. The fact that over 3,800 men beat Nazar's 48.14 in 2019. And remember, she was the world champion that year. It's just a crazy illustration of the gap. That's like over 380 times the number of women who broke 50 seconds.
Yeah, that number really drives home the level of competition on the men's side.
Then you've got the pole vault phenomenon. 1,500 boys clearing a height that's higher than the women's world record. I mean, come on. It just underscores how much of an advantage men have biologically when it comes to upper body strength and power, which are crucial for pole vaulting.
Even the most elite female athletes are getting outdone by a huge number of these young guys.
It's amazing. And even in those pure speed events, the differences are remarkable. 600 boys beating Florence Griffith Joyner's 200-meter record, which stood for years. It's pretty astonishing.
That was such a long-standing record, and now you have so many young athletes who are surpassing it.
It really shows the extent of the advantage men have when it comes to explosive speed. And then, what might surprise some people is that even in the endurance events, these patterns emerge. 50 boys beating the women's 10,000-meter road record. It suggests that even where endurance is key, biological differences are still playing a significant role.
Yeah, it shows you that even in events where strategy and pacing are so important, those underlying physiological differences can't be ignored.
So whether we're talking about pure power or stamina, these differences show up in the data.
Absolutely. So when you take it all in, the key takeaway here is that there's a significant and consistent performance gap between male and female athletes in track and field. The 2019 400-meter data shows it, and so does the fact that so many young boys are outperforming the all-time women's world records across various events. Biology, especially the role of testosterone in building muscle and speed, seems to be a fundamental factor, particularly in those power-based events like the pole vault and sprints. But those biological differences are made bigger by social and historical factors, like those inequalities in participation and access to resources and training. Those fascinating facts, like the 1,500 boys in the pole vault, they really highlight just how big that gap can be. In the end, what we're seeing is this complex dance between nature and nurture, biology and societal influence. And while women's sports are making progress, this data points to an ongoing challenge.
It's a lot to think about, isn't it? On one hand, you have the incredible achievements of athletes, both male and female. On the other hand, you have these persistent differences, these questions about fairness and opportunity.
Exactly. It makes you appreciate the incredible things athletes are capable of, but it also pushes you to think about how we can create a more level playing field, how we can support everyone's potential.
And that leads us to a final thought for our listeners. Given these inherent differences, how can we as a society best create an environment where every athlete, regardless of gender, has the chance to reach their full potential and compete in a way that's both meaningful and fair? It's a big question with a lot of layers.
No easy answers, but it's a conversation worth having as we look to the future of sports.